welcome. Whether you're watching with us live today or rewatching it later, we are so glad that you're here. My name is Rachel with the CSU Alumni Association, and you're joining us tonight for our fourth and final event in our New Year's series, Healing and Hope. If you missed our series, we had a financial health and goals workshop, Movement is Medicine, and a healthy cooking class, and they are all available on our YouTube channel. Definitely recommend you checking that out. I also want to thank all of you who are participating tonight. Please put in the comments where you're watching from and what year you graduated if you're an alum. And wherever you're tuning in from, we are so glad that you're here. We also have many attendees here who are CSU Alumni Association members. So thank you so much to our members. It really does make events like this possible. And if you are a member, you should have received your exclusive 2022 member calendar in the mail. And if you're not a member, but you're interested in the calendar, it's not too late. You can join today and one will be mailed to you right away. So let me know if you'd like one. I would be happy to get you connected. In just a moment, I'm also going to be adding a couple links to the comment section for you, including a link to download our mobile app, where you can learn more about membership, see our upcoming events calendar, and so much more, as well as a list of resources we compiled for you for our New Year's series that you're watching. This recording will also be available on our YouTube channel immediately after the event, so feel free to rewatch and share. We always welcome you to share our programs. And we hope to see you, whether it's virtual or in person sometime soon. We have a lot planned in 2022, and we really look forward to engaging with you and being back in person with some of you. And now I'm super excited to introduce you to tonight's instructor, Dr. Sue Schneider. Sue has prepared a really wonderful presentation for you all that I hope brings some lightness and some positivity to you tonight. So Sue, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And I'm grateful for all of you for joining in. I know the Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and yet I really hope to bring just some time for reflection, some time to really think about what's important in our lives and how do we manage this crazy world from a space of hope and optimism and all of those things. So again, my name is Sue Schneider. I am with the Larimer County office of CSU Extension here in Fort Collins. I am a medical anthropologist and an integrative health coach and a mindfulness instructor, and I like to bring all sorts of cultural and health and healing perspectives together and really kind of open up some space for us to reflect on some really kind of critical, kind of in the moment things that are happening. I want to start by engaging you in a question. I am really curious how you all generate hope right now in these crazy days. We have to acknowledge these are really challenging times. What do you do to generate hope? Because I'm willing to bet before I even get started that if you're in this class, you've probably been thinking about this issue. You've probably been looking for ways to elevate your energy, to make sure you're staying connected, to feel okay, even though there are some really tough things going on. So I'm going to just put that out there and we'll see what comes along. I am going to first share with you. Oh, okay. We have reading encouraging news. Rachel, thank you. Yeah, and I'm going to actually talk about news that actually factors into this conversation. Rachel, if you want to advance the slide as people are entering their thoughts, I want to share a little bit about what we're going to be doing, and then I'll come back to these comments as they come in. We are going to be exploring the concept of hope through science perspectives, and you might be surprised, but there is an entire science of hope. There are even centers of hope in universities, which is quite fascinating. But merging really some perspectives of science and wisdom traditions, which teach us a lot about hope. We're going to consider what undermines and what strengthens hope. And we're going to take a look at the research to be able to look at both sides of that. And we're going to examine hope as a critical aspect of healing. Perhaps that's not something you enter into the formula of healing, but the research very clearly tells us it's a powerful part of our healing. And I am hoping through this conversation that you come up with your own sense of what's next for you for watering seeds of hope. I really want this to be a space for you to reflect on what is important and what you can do to stay above the fray of the negativity that's happening in our world, or the fear, or all of the anxiety. And this is never a suggestion to push any of those things away, but to include that, but also include possibility and some optimism and some actual concrete steps that you can take to bring more hope into your life and to share it with others. And someone shared that one way to generate hope is planning fun things for the future so we can have things to look forward to. Absolutely. Planning trips, planning walks, planning hikes, planning books, good books to read. The planning part of it is really a wonderful thing. That just makes me happy to think about. Another is that I gain hope when I am outside in sunshine, exercising, reading the daily word, which is a small spiritual affirmation each day. So we're going to talk about this. Nature, the connection with nature is a pretty big aspect of hope, I would argue. And reading affirmations, absolutely. So we're going to talk about how we can actually direct our brains toward the positive. And this is a big part of how we kind of rewire ourselves towards hope. So I want to share a quote. Being a medical anthropologist, I've loved exploring this concept from different cultural perspectives. And so I'm drawing this quote from actually a shamanic perspective. And so this is what is argued. In today's world, being able to maintain a sense of hope is critical to staying emotionally and physically healthy. When we move into prolonged states of despair, we are drained of the vitality we need to imagine the creative solutions needed to shift our life in a new direction, which will ultimately help us evolve and live a deeper, more meaningful life. As long as we have hope, we have a foundation upon which positive change and healing can occur. There is a great sense of volition in here, of our capacity to impact our lives, our own lives, and that the way we think can help us develop that foundation for a positive change. So just putting it out there, how critical hope is, because this is not news to anyone, but there is a sense of a flagging hope out there. Our pandemic continues long after I think most of us believed it could. We are feeling the impacts of climate change. We've witnessed a lot of societal suffering and dividedness. So many people are feeling isolated, especially after 2 years of this pandemic. Many of us are feeling stuck emotionally for various reasons. The Colorado Health Foundation conducts an annual survey, and this really kind of highlighted what's going on for me. There's increased concerns that Coloradoans are sharing about their mental health. So in 2020, 55% of Coloradoans, which was the majority, rated mental health as an extremely or very serious problem. In 2021, that rose by 8%. 63% of Coloradoans are seeing mental health as an extremely or very serious problem. A majority, 55%, said they had experienced anxiety in the past year. And more than a third shared that they had felt depression over the course of the previous year. I don't share anything that's new information with you here. I think we all can feel how these statistics resonate within us and within what we have seen. But I feel like in a talk about hope, it's really important to name the reality of what's out there. And next slide, please. We can argue that in times like these, especially, we really have to trust the potential for change. We may not see it directly, we may not really feel it, but we have to trust that there is a potential for change, for joy, for healing, for the end of COVID, for us to heal our planet. And this trust can help us manifest the best of who we are. We are the only locus of control. We're the only things we actually have full control over. And so starting there is a critical, beginning point. And trusting in this possibility that things can change and we can have hope and experience joy is what moves us to serve the greatest joy, the greatest good. It is what moves us into action. And you'll hear me say again and again and again how important action is in this context. And so here's a definition by psychologist and meditation teacher Tara Brach. Hope is the possibility that gives us the energy to manifest our best. Hope is the possibility. And so from there, we can bring our best selves to change. Next slide. So before I go on, I want to do a reflection with you. So I hope you are willing to just give yourself a moment to do this reflection. Fortunately, we're not staring at each other, so we don't have to look at each other, closing our eyes and settling into this reflection. But just give yourself a moment here. We're going to be reflecting on our own hope quotient. So just take a few breaths here and just settle inside yourself. If you want to close your eyes, that might be helpful. How hopeful are you? So just invite yourself to answer this question from your heart. Don't think too hard of it. Don't think too hard about it. Do you sense that in your own life you would like to accommodate more hope? What happens in your body when you imagine opening more space for hope in your heart? What does it feel like to actually have that experience of hope? Do you sense the possibility that there can be increased understanding and kindness and caring in the world? And what arises for you when you envision a kinder, more caring, more hopeful world? So just letting those answers settle within you. You can apply them later when you think about what's next for you in your hope planning. But I just want to say, for all of our shadow, and we humans have some challenges here, our species is amazingly altruistic and deeply compassionate. We see hope coming out of darkness in large and small ways. We recently, those of you who are still here in Colorado, we recently had fires burning in Boulder, and there was such an outpouring of support. There still is an outpouring of support. The stories are absolutely amazing, and it's not any different than other disasters or difficulties that people go through. I recently had a personal experience. My son got extremely anxious after the Michigan shootings. He's in middle school. And I reached out to his school counselor, and my husband and I shared our concerns and worries and how are we going to get through this and help him feel comfortable. The counselor reached out. The teachers reached out. All of the caring and support they offered him turned the whole thing around. Now, when we ask him on a scale of 1 to 10 how anxious he is at school, he says, oh, 1, it's okay. And this is because the outpouring of support. I could go on and on and on about stories of hope, but stories of hope are extremely powerful. They're extremely important. And if you are interested in this topic of hope, and if you wanted to think more about the power of stories of hope, Jane Goodall recently, with Douglas Abrams, who did all the interviews with her, recently wrote The Book of Hope, an entire book written about hope. And this is a person who has seen it all. She's seen so many amazing connections with the chimpanzees that she was studying. And she's also seen so much, deforestation, degradation of the land. She's seen both sides of it, and she still maintains the argument that there is absolute reason for hope. So these stories are powerful. Next slide, please. But we misunderstand hope quite a bit. And I want to just point to a few misunderstandings of hope right off the bat here. Hope is not positive thinking. Positive thinking is about wishing that something changes, but positive thinking doesn't necessarily involve investing yourself in making those changes, taking action towards the change. It's this kind of idea that I hope something good happens. Maybe I'll try to think my way toward it, but I'm not going to do anything about it, which really is the opposite of real hope, which requires action and engagement. So positive thinking is not the same as truly engaging hope. And hope isn't necessarily optimism. Hope isn't just the optimism or the conviction that things will work out a certain way. Or another way of saying it is blind faith, that we're going to win the lottery, we'll find the right partner, we'll lose that 20 pounds that we don't want. Wants are very natural, but when the wants tighten into expectation or grasping, that we have to have these things, everything has to be perfect and right and okay for us to be happy, they can actually cause suffering. Or they can prevent us from facing a truth that we need to face, or from taking appropriate action. They cause suffering when we're grasping. So Tara Brach argues that this is not mature hope. Positive thinking and optimism is not mature hope. Next slide, please. What is mature hope then? I like this concept. It makes us think about how we can grow a little bit. And mature hope has 3 elements to it. There is the aspiration to fulfill the potential of what is possible. So it's this idea that the seeds are already here. The seeds of goodness, the seeds of, positive things happening are already here. So with that comes a sense of what is possible, that we can move things in a different direction. If we can water the seeds, we can cultivate those seeds of hope. Again, this is not a passive thing that we're doing. This is very active. It also requires that there's some level of energy to put into that goal. And this is a bit challenging because, as I've been reflecting on this concept of hope, just thinking about, gosh, how depleted we all are. Where would this energy come from? But I'm going to keep arguing this, that, hope generates, the investment we make in hope generates more hope. The energy we invest in hope generates more hope. And so to find a little bit of energy, to offer your voice, to offer donations, to offer a little bit of time investment, whatever it is, to serve the causes that call you, to help generate hope. So energy comes from the hope, and then hope comes from that energy investment. It's purely cyclical. And then, as I've said multiple times, action and engagement, investment makes a difference in hope. And so these are things that we can cultivate. We can cultivate mature hope. And I'm going to talk about this sense of hopelessness. And these things really are an antidote to hopelessness. Next slide, please. So another way of saying this or framing this, hope science has argued that there are 4 components of hope, that we have realistic goals to pursue, and that we have realistic pathways to achieve those goals. So not things that are so far out there, I'm gonna, clean up all the oceans overnight, but that there are pathways step by step. We can donate, support the causes we, appreciate. We can take the steps that are within our reach, but we've identified pathways to do that. We also have to have confidence that we can achieve these goals. And I actually think that stories of hope are really helpful for us in building that confidence. And we need the support to help us overcome adversity along the way. Research hands down tells us that social support is the most important thing in generating positive change, that we have to have people on our side, people we're willing to ask for help, to connect with, to get that support from. So these 4 components of hope, if we enact them, they can be considered part of the hope cycle. The more of each we have, the more they inspire hope in our life. And as a health coach, I am always one to really encourage people to think about change in terms of baby steps. Really small things that we can do to activate the hope, to plant the seeds of hope, to water the seeds of hope, to build on this hope cycle. Not huge things, small things. And over time, you can see the power of these small actions, these small steps really builds upon themselves. Next slide. So I want to step back here and talk a little bit about what diminishes hope, because I'm sure some of you are thinking to yourself, gosh, I just seeing some of these natural disasters happening, seeing how sick people are right now, seeing how tired people are. It's really hard to feel like I can generate, this sense of hope. And so I just want to talk about what undermines hope, what gets in the way, because to understand those things can really help us recognize that, to some extent, these are a result of conditioning over time. This idea of learned hopelessness or learned helplessness, this was learned helplessness actually was the term coined by Martin Seligman, I think in the late 60s, in his research. It's this idea that a sense of powerlessness can arise from either a traumatic event or kind of a persistent failure to succeed or persistent failure to feel like things are changing. And the psychology of it is that learned helplessness often originates in childhood, at least the seeds of it do. Oftentimes it's, we all know this psychology based on the unreliable or unresponsive caregivers when we're young and we need help and no one comes to our aid. We may be left feeling that nothing we can do will change our situation. So these are really deeply wired kind of experiences and, potentially traumatic experiences, both in our brains and in our bodies. Learned hopelessness and helplessness is thought to be one of the underlying causes of depression. It's like being, like that picture of the ant stuck with a pin and the ant just can't go anywhere. But we may get out of those situations in our lives, and then the stories about our helplessness is stuck in our brains and our bodies. It's not our fault. We just have to find a way to work our way out of that. We can fall into helplessness because we get so overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. So a lot of us have been re-triggered by the pandemic, by the various societal problems we're having. And this inaction, this experience of overwhelm can lead us to overlook opportunities for relief or change. It might be that we fall into a state of depression and our partner says, why aren't you doing anything to change it? But we have to understand that depression and that sense of overwhelm is actually hitching our brain to this kind of sense of defeat. And it's easy to overlook, steps that we can take for relief or change. We have to give ourselves a lot of grace in this complex environment and just understand that this is a cycle we face. This can lead to apathy and resignation, just giving up. I also threw on here, this is not in the research, but the news diminishes. It's another factor that diminishes hope. So when we, continue to batter our brains with kind of the toxicity in our culture right now and all of the overwhelming things that our media focuses on, we really exaggerate our probably sense of helplessness and hopelessness. We have to understand that taking in the news is equivalent to ingesting food. It's going into our bodies and we're ingesting that toxicity. So what happens when we're bringing more and more toxicity into our bodies? So these are just things to think about. They're real for us and they're challenging. They are, many of them, at least the learned hopelessness part, is a result of our conditioning, and it just keeps coming back and back again. We can condition ourselves as much as we condition ourselves to the experience of hopelessness. We have to understand we can condition ourselves to believe in the possibility of hope. We can rewire our brains in that direction. We have to seed, water, and install hope. Next slide. So how can we do that? I'm not going to suggest it's easy when we are feeling down, but I am suggesting it is a practice every single day. Are there small things we can do to strengthen hope, to seed, water, and install hope? There's a lot of research out there about installing the positive in our body. So experiencing memories of goodness, an interaction that we had that was positive, something that gave us hope. We saw a seed, we saw a little seedling that we didn't think was going to survive start to bloom, and we see all this resilience coming out. Or the stories that we hear of goodness, all of the resilience, all of the perseverance, all of the, giving and heartfulness that's actually happening in our society. Experiencing that goodness is not just a matter of thinking about those stories, but according to Rick Hansen, who's a neuropsychologist, it is about soaking those experiences into our bodies, savoring those experiences. And that might mean at night lying down and saying, what is the story of hope I want to relive in my body right now? And just breathing into it and feeling it in our body, soaking and savoring it. This requires us to be present and quiet and open to these feelings. But it's a really powerful connection we can have with, all that is possible. Connection strengthens hope, probably more than anything else does. And that's connection with others. I mean, the antidote to social isolation is connection. And as hard as that might be for some of us who are introverts or some of us who are staying isolated because of COVID, any way to reach out with other people, with pets, whatever it is, with nature, is actually really powerful. And I'm going to show you a few slides shortly that can give you some maybe inspiration for doing that. Connecting with ourselves. I have found that I need a lot more quiet time these days. I need a lot more kind of reflection time. I need a lot more time to just sit and breathe. And that really helps me connect to what's going on. This is how I'm feeling. I notice it. I name it. I acknowledge it, I give myself some compassion. All of those things are really powerful. For some of us, we connect with a higher power, and that's what really brings a strong sense of hope to us. All of these forms of connection are vital. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm too busy, I don't have time to go out and sit in the sun when there's sun, or go out and take a walk in the snow, for those of you who love the snow in Colorado, if you're here. Any way that we connect is so powerful, and we have to give ourselves permission to make those small and large connections. It absolutely does strengthen hope. And then there's also the perspective shift, because if we find ourselves caught in the negativity and the fear, this really keeps us away from experiencing our moment-to-moment existence, just the wonder of the moment, which we could spend weeks and not even realize, when we're outside, gosh, there's wind, or, I can, when I'm lying down in bed, I can actually feel my breathing, or whatever it is. When we can shift our perspective away from our kind of potentially self-focus, it might be anguish, it might be anxiety. We can shift our perspective. We can recognize we are not alone in our suffering. We realize, wait a minute, like me, others are feeling anxious. Like me, others are experiencing anguish, right? And when we understand that we are not alone in the suffering and we are connected, our pain is inherently lessened, because the hardest part of the pain is feeling like we're the only ones experiencing it. As a result of understanding we are not alone, we are actually together in this, our compassion for others gets strengthened. And that further moves us away from our anguish. So this shift in perspective, just recognizing, okay, this is difficult. Others are experiencing this. I'm not alone. I can send some compassion to others who are experiencing that, can be really powerful. And in all of these practices, and I call them practices because these are things we need to bring into our daily lives again and again. They're not inherent in our, the way our brains work to doing good, positive things for us. But they're really important practices we have to make a commitment to. And perhaps in those practices, we can achieve what the late Desmond Tutu writes about. He actually wrote a book on hope and forgiveness. And he writes, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. And that goes back to that sense of possibility. When we can see that there is light despite the darkness, we recognize, there is possibility for good things, for change. And I just want to say, Jane Goodall in her book, and I really appreciate what she says, she talks about how we need to face reality. We need to be aware that things aren't going well right now. And she has a whole section on our climate crisis. So we need to really acknowledge what is happening and all of the difficulty around that. But at the same time, we need to give equal time to stories of hope, experiences of goodness, connection, I would argue awe and wonder as well. And there's space for all of it. Next slide. So I want to argue, and I've said this before, but really reiterate that hope is not passive. It is not something that can just happen by wishful thinking. And if we all agree this, then we all make this effort to put really good, positive things into the world. That kind of energy can actually shift what's happening. And there's a lot of research that shows this about energy and prayer and all of the things that we may not count as impacting change. So hope is not passive. In fact, more hopeful people anticipate setbacks along the way. So, if you're one of those people, you're fully aware that there are going to be setbacks, and that's just part of the deal. Still keep watering those seeds of hope. Still keep taking those actions. And Desmond Tutu actually talks about 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. That is the way things go, and I think we can all see how that works. But the second piece of this is really important. Hope comes from engaging with problems rather than avoiding them. And that can be a real challenge when we're depleted and tired and want the things to go away. But this engagement part is really important. This is really my key message, is how do we engage with these difficulties and find our way forward? Next slide. So I want to take you on, and if you have any questions, please feel free to share those, and I'm happy to stop and answer any questions as we go. But this next set of slides really is a visual journey of hope, because as I was doing this hope research, I just ran into so many things that were so impactful for me, and brought again and again that point that, hope and anything we put into it are generative. So with connection generates hope, and hope generates more connection. And this is all the hope cycle. So let's take a look at some of these pictures and just get a sense of how this feels to you, to think about themes of hope in a kind of somatic way. How do these pictures impact your body? Next slide. So I start here because, with this concept of connection, the truth is that there is so much more going on than we can possibly understand. And the interconnectedness of our world is profound. That interconnectedness can offer us aspirations of hope. Just looking at this picture, this was put in Jane Goodall's book, and the caption read, "Reaching across the non-existent barrier thought to divide us from the rest of the animal kingdom." That barrier doesn't exist. You can see in this picture, it just doesn't exist. And just looking at that picture makes me so happy and hopeful, because connection goes so far beyond what we may define it to be, which is human connection, or the connection between me and my friends, or me and my relatives. How can we generate hope and new energy from connections of all species and in nature as well? And how can that help us revitalize our energy, our spirit, bring greater hope into our days? Next slide. So this further makes the argument that connection happens in mysterious and interesting ways. So Suzanne Simard made the discovery of the interconnectedness of trees. She called this the wood wide web. So through this network, trees can receive information about their kinship, about their health. They can support each other through the wood wide web. This is fascinating. These trees have connections that we are absolutely oblivious to. And if that is the case, and we can just look around in nature, we have to just wonder, well, what else is communicating, right? And how can we make that connection to nature, right? And these are just different forms of communication that can help us generate hope. Next slide, please. So this theme of resilience, again, hope generates resilience, and resilience generates hope. Let's look at these pictures. So some of you may have heard about this story of the survivor tree. So on 9/11, the buildings collapsed, and in all of that black rubble, there stood a little component of one tree, burned on the inside. And caregivers took this tree. There's a little picture of the tree on the left-hand side, but this is after the caregivers already had nurtured it a bit. But so much energy was put into nurturing this tree, and it survived. And you can see it there in its full glory. And this tree is truly a symbol of hope and resilience. That things that seem to be at the end, sometimes we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, and that there's so much more resilience than we could possibly imagine. We hear stories of this all the time. Next slide. This is another example. This one's called the miracle pine. So after the 2011 tsunami in Japan, you can see on the left-hand side that picture of the one pine tree that somehow survived against all odds. And there it is with some nurturing, some care on the right-hand side, some support. That tree is, again, a symbol of hope, right? And these are hope stories. These are stories that, we should take with us, as we lie down to bed and think about, I'm going to think about the miracle pine today because, wow, this is powerful, right? And we all have this capacity for resilience in different kinds of ways. And understanding resilience is really about faith, having faith that we can survive and even thrive in difficult situations. And it's about trust as well. And sometimes we lose our sense of trust when things get rocky. So how do we kind of reinvigorate our trust? Maybe through hope stories like this. Next slide. And then this is mine. I just had to throw awe in there because, with a little more time on my hands at home, I'm not going too far these days. I'm working from home, reminding myself to step outside at night, take a look up into the sky, just think about what's bigger than me, what's bigger than COVID, what's bigger than all this suffering. And this is awe. This is awe and wonder. And again, it's that generative hope cycle. Next slide. So just the simplest way to talk about awe, the Earth is 4.54 billion years old, and the universe is 13.7 billion years old, more or less. People have different numbers. This is a moment in time, right? And there's so much around us that we don't understand, but we can just kind of bring into our consciousness and say, wow, this is amazing that I am part of this living, breathing universe that is so wise and aged. We can't even imagine how old that is. Next slide. And then just the simple sense of awe, of looking up at our night sky, our stars, seeing our shooting stars, and just remembering how beautiful, some of the most simple moments can be. And thinking about really how hope can manifest by opening up to the vast mysteries of our universe. One of the unique things about our species is that we can experience awe and wonder, and we can talk about it. We can name it. So not to say other species don't experience awe and wonder, but we know for a fact that ours does. So being more deliberate about having those experiences. Next slide. So shifting a little bit now to applications to healing, the relationship between hope and healing. And I have to say, Rachel had made a suggestion that I teach a class called Hope and Healing, or Healing and Hope. And I really had to think about it because I thought, boy, this is something that might be a little bit outside of what we usually talk about. But the more I thought about really investing time and reflecting on this concept of hope and its applications for healing, I felt like this is a discussion. This is a discussion that is a helpful one to open up because of the reason, the initial slide about hope is a sense of possibility, right? And so back to this quote, as long as we have hope, we have a foundation upon which positive change and healing can occur, right? And healing can happen in all sorts of different ways. And I'm not necessarily talking about, our healing of our bodies, but kind of the healing of our trauma and the healing of our pain and the healing of our spirits in some cases, the healing of our mental angst and anguish. So what are some of the things that hope can lead to? Next slide. In the most kind of extreme case, hope can lead to survival. We take for granted the power of the mind. And this came up actually for me pretty powerfully in Jane Goodall's book. She wrote an example of a Holocaust survivor actually sharing this story about a girl that was in a concentration camp, barely alive. And she faked it that she was alive enough to not have to go into, the death, result, and was able to keep herself alive, even though against all odds, because she believed that they were going to be freed on Christmas. She had this just complete conviction that that was going to happen. So this girl managed to survive until Christmas. And when she experienced that they were actually not going to be freed on Christmas, she actually passed away the next day. I mean, this example just blew me away. And we hear of these examples, they're pretty extreme. They make you wonder what the power of the mind is. And there's so much research out there about the placebo effect and how our thinking affects our health and well-being. People in clinical trials that are offered the actual trial drug versus a placebo, sometimes the outcomes are exactly the same for the people who receive the drug and the people who receive the placebo. Why is this? And we don't understand fully, but the power of the mind is very strong. So I just want to suggest that in the most extreme case, hope is really important to have. And this, again, isn't wishful thinking. This is deep, understanding of truth. Like there is possibility, there is potential out there. And I like to bring this quote into it from George Mumford, who is he was an MBA coach, I believe, now mindfulness teacher. He writes, "You are not what you think you are, but what you think you are." What you think you are. It's useful to just kind of play with that a little bit. The power of the mind, right? Hope can be powerful and lead to, really good results. Next slide. Hope can lead to action. And as we've been talking a lot here, action is what we need to generate change. So hope bolsters engagement. And when we are engaged, we know this research, it improves our physical and emotional health, diminishes our hopelessness, builds connection, and it leads to creative solutions, right? That action contributes to actual societal environmental change. Next slide. And hope can help us shift perspective. So we have the potential to see the goodness in others or the hopefulness in a situation rather than the limitations. We evolutionarily are, born with a negativity bias, which, has helped us get out of danger. Back when we lived in the savannah and, get our fight and flight reaction in sync with getting out of danger. But what it has done is left us with a better memory of fear and the things we're fearful of than the possibility or the goodness, right? And so we actually need to be intentional about shifting that negativity bias. And doing that through things like hope stories, doing positive acts can help shift our brain away from the negativity bias. that helps us see the potential rather than limitations. It helps us see the goodness rather than the struggle. And it opens us up with this perspective of being able to look at the world in all of its aliveness with awe and wonder, potentially, as some of the slides suggested. Next slide. So really, what I want to leave you with is that we all can make an aspiration for hope. We can ask ourselves the question, what is my aspiration for cultivating hope in difficult times? We can ask ourselves, what matters most to me? Who do I want to be in these times? How do I want to be? What are the seeds of hope that I'd like to plant? And in that aspiration, if we are disciplined, we can have the experience of what is it like to live within that possibility of hope, and actually sense that within ourselves. What is it like to live within the possibility of hope? What shifts within me? We can rest inside that possibility of hope. It can give us a lot of peace and comfort, maybe quiet some of the anxiety a little bit. There's a lot that our aspiration can do. Ritual is powerful also in difficult times. Ritual can be something like lighting a candle of hope and just setting it out every night and having that remind us, oh yeah, I'm making an intention toward increasing that hope quotient. My family does some rituals, like we take some deep breaths together before our meal, kind of setting our intentions for how we want to be together. Hanging up pictures that are positive in your room, wherever you are, in your bedroom, in your study, in your house, in your office. All of those things are considered ritual, things that you return to again and again. And again, I bring up this concept of practice, but it is this repetitive nature of doing these positive things, and ritual can help cultivate that. Other questions have to do with, what do you need to water the seeds of hope? What do you need in your life to water those seeds of hope? Do you need to turn the news off every so often? Do you need to maybe ask, someone you're living with or someone you're working with, maybe to tone down the negativity a little bit? Do you need to find a way to share stories of hope? Maybe an email a day, a story of hope. What exactly do you need to connect with to nourish the seeds of hope? So I want to close this out with a question for you to think about, because my hope in this class has been not to just give you a head full of concepts, although that's part of it because it's an interesting topic, but to let those concepts germinate your own thinking and your own ideas about how you want to be in these times, how you want to generate hope, how you want to share that hope, how you want to manifest that hope. So my question really is, what do you want to strengthen or build upon? What would be your next step to expand the energy of hope that you already carry? Again, I'm a proponent of baby steps, but making commitment and taking those steps. What is your next step to expand the energy of hope that you already carry? And feel free to send, type it out in the chat box, or just make that commitment to yourself. What is this next step for me? And as you either put your thoughts in chat or reflect on that, I just want to read kind of a last quote here from Desmond Tutu from his book of Forgiving, which I found very powerful. He writes, "It seems there is no end to the creative ways we humans can find to hurt each other, and no end to the reasons we feel justified in doing so. There is also no end to the human capacity for healing. In each of us, there is an innate ability to create joy out of suffering, to find hope in the most hopeless of situations, and to heal any relationship in need of healing." Next slide. So I am going to leave you all with those thoughts. And please feel free, if you have any questions before we close this out, you can feel free to share those questions or those thoughts. And I want to offer you resources in the case you want to dig deeper into some of these topics of hope and healing and mindfulness and compassion. There are health and well-being classes posted on the Larimer County Extension website. A series of mindful self-care videos are there. There's a Living Mindfully online program through CSU Online that I developed as well. And you can go to those websites that you see there to access that information. And I really appreciate your joining us tonight in this class.
Thank you so much, Sue. I loved all of your wonderful examples. And we did have one question come in, and someone was wondering ways to help encourage someone in their life to have more.
So ways to encourage other people to have more hope. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because helping other people find that motivation is sometimes tricky. But really, for me, the starting point for anyone, and if you're encouraging anyone, is really to step into what they're experiencing first. You cannot bypass the reasons why that person might be struggling with a lack of hope. And so, not to go into the storyline of all the things that are wrong, but perhaps to just open some space and let them acknowledge, this is anxiety for me. This is, a feeling of helplessness for me. And to allow them to name that. And that is a really powerful thing, to hold space for someone, to be there for someone in that way. And from there, once they've identified where they're stuck, it might be like, hey, do you want to light a candle with me? And let's share a hope story around the candle. It's not something we can tell them to do. It might be something that you partner with them on. Or, hey, do you want to take a walk with me? And while you're walking, say, oh my gosh, did you notice that, the snow is this certain way, or this tree is this certain way? And partner with them and just see what resonates with them. But companionship and connection, opening space for others, and then acknowledging, the difficulty and what holds us back from hope. Those are all important parts of how we nourish hope within ourselves.
Lovely. Thank you so much for answering that question, Sue. And thank you, Lynn, for tuning in. She said, very enlightening. Thank you. We definitely appreciate you all joining us this evening. Sue, do you have any final parting words for us tonight?
No, I just, I hope we can all take this energy out with us, and we can share some of the things that have resonated with us and reflected on. And just, really, I'm hoping that you'll make a commitment to do one small thing a day that generates hope and waters those seeds.
I love that. Well, thank you so much again, Sue, for sharing this uplifting presentation with us tonight. And for everyone out there, or if you're watching later, just know that we're here for you as a resource, the CSU Alumni Association and CSU Extension. Please don't hesitate to reach out if there's something we can provide you. And in the meantime, take care, share some hope stories, and go Rams. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Take care.